Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to call this meeting to order. Read the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across North America. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississaugas people, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda will be approved as distributed. Motion to approve them. There's two sets of minutes there. Motion to approve the minutes. Thank you, Trustee Barnes. So we're going to move on to the information items. Move right into the bylaws.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I had a question with regards to the minutes.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
It's just, it's a follow-up. It's not being able to question it. Just on, because I was not at the last meeting, so I just wanted to follow up on, it's page 2 of the minutes of November the 9th, or page 5 of our package. About 2/3 down, it talks about the conversation with regards to the complaints involving the Director of Education, and staff was going to come back with some other drafts of provisions. So this is more like just a follow-up. Is that I didn't see it on the agenda tonight. Is that coming back at the next meeting, or are we discussing that tonight? I'm just, it's matters arising from the minutes. So just seeking to understand when that's going to come back.
Okay, thank you.
May I respond through you, Madam Chair?
Absolutely. Thanks, Patrick.
Through you, Chair Stone. So the plan, Trustee Barrett, is to take these documents as drafted out for consultation with the aids that the summaries and those sorts of things for consultation, and come back to governance in January following the consultation with the any proposed changes, which would include obviously the comments from the committee at the last meeting as well. So the proposed revised drafts would come back to committee in January is the tentative plan for that.
Okay, so just to clarify then, there wasn't any intention of coming back prior to. It's going to potentially have new language going out to public, and then with feedback come back to the group, and then there's another opportunity to be able to have that further conversation on that, right? Okay.
That's the plan, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we will move on to the bylaws, and I think first, if Paul, are you with us? I think last meeting or 2 meetings back, Paul, I said that I would start with you because you had a question at the end of that meeting, and we didn't have time for it. So, Paul, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I did send out a couple of notes. Were they received?
I think I'm hoping everybody received them. Did everybody receive Paul's email?
Well, I only sent them out to yourself and Patrick and Jillian. I said yes, that you could send them out as well. But anyway, it goes back to where we left off. So the parts of the notes that you have there are to do with the procedural bylaws. So if we could go to that part, and I'm just trying to bring them up here on my computer.
While you're doing that, Trustee Crawford, maybe I can fill the space with some comments on the draft in relation to your first, what I understand was one concern you had, which was the incorporation of Robert's rules. And so what the draft contemplates regarding Roberts is set out at 1.5 of the new language and also 5.1. That's what's currently drafted in terms of Roberts. So 1.5 says that 1.4, my apologies, 1.4 and 5.1. 1.4 says, subject to any applicable legislation or regulation, any gap in these bylaws shall be addressed by reference to the latest edition of Robert's Rules of Orders, newly revised, which is defined as RONR. And then we also see in 5.1 that the bylaws are to be supplemented by RNOR, so by Robert's Rules, to the extent there are gaps. So that's the current drafting in terms of trying to incorporate Robert's Rules.
Okay, my suggestion was that we would put in the standard wording, which may appear elsewhere in the bylaws, but in the procedural bylaws, it should appear at the beginning of them, as it did in the original one.
Paul, which number are you speaking of?
Well, the ones that I sent to you.
Oh, the 5.12.6.
Well, I think what Trustee Crawford would be suggesting would be that 1.4 would be replaced with the following language. The rules contained in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, shall govern all matters of procedure in all cases to which they are applicable and in which they are not inconsistent with these bylaws and any special rules of order of the Durham District School Board may adopt, or any statutes or regulations.
That's correct.
That is the suggested language. So I think the appropriate place to put it would be, 1.4 could be, if the will of the committee, 1.4 could be beefed up.
Trustees, do you want to see that paragraph that's been suggested? Is there any way we can put it up so the trustees can read that? And I apologize for not sending it out.
I can probably share my screen. Just give me a minute. I'll have to find
it. It's the standard that we've used before. It's just that in the new draft, it doesn't appear at the beginning of the new procedural bylaws. I think it's 5, isn't it?
I'm not, oh, okay. Can
I
you enlarge that at all, Patrick?
Just highlighting the piece that's Trustee Crawford is discussing.
Chair Stone, it's actually in bylaw 2.1 or 1.0, because that's where I read it. And I actually have concerns about using this language. So I've had my hand up for some time and I would like to be called on before we move past that.
Okay. Because I can't see your hand. So go ahead, Nikki.
So my concern is when you say the current version, then when it gets interpreted, does it mean the current version that was in place at the time, or the current version because it may be amended over the course of time? So to me, there's actually a lack of clarity if you use that language and you don't say as may be amended from time to time, or whatever version is current, or some such thing. I actually think the language is a little bit deficient in terms of clarity.
I certainly, that's a fair comment, Trustee Lundquist. So regardless of Trustee Crawford's comments and how that committee may deal with that, I can revise the draft to provide that it would reference the latest edition of Robert's Rules of Order as may be amended from time to time, which I think makes sense. So that's what I would suggest to the committee in terms of dealing with Trustee Lundquist's concern.
Are there any comments, concerns?
Just clarifying it, because when we use the current, and if we describe the current one as 12, there's nothing wrong with saying as amended time to time, because it could be that it would be, and we would be dealing with the older one without realizing it. So it's just a precaution, and I have no objection to it. It's not usually included in that standard one, but there's nothing wrong with having that.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. Patrick, we'll leave that with you then. And Donna, sorry, Trustee Edwards.
Okay, I just put it up because I have questions for the two people that spoke, and that I believe my understanding what Paul's saying, and when it's in the 5 point whatever, he wants it almost like 5.1, that is the top of he wants to change the numbering of it, so it's the very first thing. I don't know if I just want to clarify that with Paul. And the other one is a clarification with Nikki when she was suggesting the changes. As you're talking about the current language or Paul's language that he's referring to, or both?
Well, I think if I can jump in just for a second, I think Trustee Lundquist's comments would apply however we deal with Trustee Crawford's concern. I'll change the definition of Robert's rules. So the RNOR will now be defined as the latest edition, as may be amended from time to time.
Does that answer your question, Trustee Edwards?
The first one, and then it's Paul, as whether my understanding is the way he was saying it, he wanted in the procedural part, he wanted it like almost the very first point.
Trustee Crawford, were you saying you wanted that in 5.1 at the top? Trustee Crawford? You're on mute, Paul? No, we might have lost him. That was my understanding too, Patrick, that it went into the 5.1 at the top.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. 5.1. There's one, if the members are finished discussing it, I do have one comment to make.
Okay. I'm just going to go to Trustee Barrett.
Sure.
You can finish that conversation. I want to talk about the Roberts rules, but not necessarily specifically about where it fits or the wording. So
okay.
So I'm okay to just sit back and let Patrick finish.
I'll let Patrick talk. Yeah.
It's just a small.
I am back, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Paul. Did you hear the question?
Yeah, just to clarify it, that terminology could show up on various bylaws. It doesn't just have to show up once. And so when it does show up, it's okay to have the wording that we're discussing. But Trustee Edwards was correct. It's the particular bylaw that I'm interested in is the number 5, the 5.1. It doesn't appear at the beginning of it, and I think that it should.
Okay, just to clarify, of course, these are proposed consolidated bylaws, so that would be section 5 as opposed to bylaw 5. But
yeah, it's still the ones that we were received.
Yeah, it's still a good place for it to go. So the only comment I was going to make is on the proposed language. I think there's an and that should be an or. It says, and let me just read it again. The rules contained in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order newly revised shall govern. I'll change that. It won't say current edition. So it'll now say the rules contained in RNOR, which will be already defined, shall govern all matters of procedure in all cases to which they are applicable and in which they are not inconsistent with these bylaws and any special rules of order. I think that has to be an or. So it would read, are not inconsistent with these bylaws or any special rule of order of the Durham District School Board or any statute or regulation. So that's the proposed, to take Trustee Crawford language and just tweak it a little bit. I think that's what I would suggest to the committee.
That's, I agree with that. Yeah, it should be standardized that way. And the other parts, if I can stay with this, Madam Chair, and deal with the other parts in 5 that are also part of the notes I sent out.
Trustee Crawford, would you mind if I just popped over to Trustee Barrett?
No, I don't mind. I don't mind resting and coming back later as long as you don't forget me.
Okay, I'll call on Trustee Barrett.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I just wanted to raise the issue as we embed this within our bylaws. There certainly is and has been a great deal of conversation with regards to the appropriateness of Robert's Rules of Order and its interpretation as whether or not it truly represents equity and diversity. And there's quite a movement commencing throughout the province that Robert's Rules of Order is not necessarily broad enough or circumspect enough in order to be able to ensure that everybody feels treated equitably. So I'm not suggesting a change. All I'm suggesting is that when we embed this in our bylaws, that we may have to re-examine this at some point, because certainly some of the recommendations of equity and diversity audits are recommending that Robert's Rules of Order does not necessarily give the comfortableness or the concept. I'm not suggesting one way or the other. I'm just putting that out as another interpretation of Robert's Rules of Order. So not suggesting any changes, just saying it's there and that we should not lose sight of as well. So
yeah, thank you, Trustee Barrett. I've heard that myself, and as you say, we may have to revisit the bylaws just to change that. It depends on what happens in the future. Trustee Lundquist.
Sorry, there were actually a bunch of people in front of me, Chair Stone. So Councillor Cotter had his hand up, and so did Crawford, Mr.
Yeah, it's just that Paul knows I'll come back to him as well. Councillor Cotter, were you going to comment on the Robert's Rules, or was it something else?
Yeah, it was on this point, but I defer to the members first. I'll come in at the end.
Okay, Trustee Lundquist, go ahead, please.
So this is not an uncommon refrain, right? Many of us have heard concerns about Robert's Rules and the interplay between equity and Robert's Rules. But I would say that one of the things that I think is helpful in terms of this process is that our bylaws can actually reflect that. I'm sorry, my phone keeps going off. I apologize. That there actually is more freedom for discussion than would normally be the case in terms of Robert's Rules. So they're very, I think, constrictive. They're meant to manage certain kinds of meetings. And I do think that one of the important things about this bylaw review is that we actually understand that the very point of it is to give people fulsome voice in the discussions, but still maintain orderly meetings. So I didn't want to discount what Trustee Barrett is saying, because I agree and I think it's very important. But I do think that there is much room in the bylaws to address some of these things as a board. You know, to me, we rely on Robert's Rules when we need help navigating challenging situations, but I have found generally that the board is respectful of other of all trustee voices and voices. So I think that we will probably be in an okay place in the end of this, but I did want to acknowledge the concern that Trustee Barrett has raised, because it's a pressing and ever-present concern across the province for sure.
Thank you, Trustee
Madam
Lundquist.
Chair, my hand was up for that.
Okay, go ahead, Trustee Crawford.
No, it's true. We can discuss Robert's Rules, but the truth of it is, I think as Trustee Lundquist was saying there, that our bylaws dictate it over that, and so do the laws. So what's in our bylaws is much more important. We refer to Roberts because everything is covered in Roberts. And so when you can't find it in your bylaws, you go to Roberts to determine what you're going to do. It's like a manual for building something. It's a guideline, and we're pretty much stuck with it until we find another authority to go to. But for the time being, our bylaws determine.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Patrick.
Yeah, I was just going to make the same point, which is that to the extent there are any particular concerns around equity, we should embed them straight in the bylaws, which I think we've tried to do. So I hope we've covered that off to, in terms of participation. Also, I think 5.1.1 as drafted, makes clear that, even with whether it's the bylaws or Roberts, the point is not to rely on technicalities. The point is to facilitate, meaningful discussion at the board table. So just, the draft does include that language, which I think is helpful as well.
Thank you. Any further comments around Roberts? Seeing none, I'd like to move on to the next comments that we received. Maybe I'll call on Donna. Would you like to talk about what your comments that you sent in?
Oh, yeah, it was just, it was a question because around Bill 13, which is the big omnibus bill supporting people and business act, it's actually changing, making sure that the term of office starting 2022 begins basically November 15th. The proposed, the changes that we have, and what it's done is it's also reflected in the Ontario Municipal Elections Act and the municipal legislation. So we still mention that it's organization meetings start in December in, I think it's whatever, it's 3.1 or whatever it is. I have to go back to the bylaw, but then later on we talk about scheduling and we say that, you know, in the case of an election year, my concern is that the first one comes first. So it looks like organization meetings in December, and then we talk about scheduling. So I was just suggesting that maybe either we put at the beginning of that particular sentence around organization meetings except in the year of an election, because, or else we change the order, something, so that is very clear around scheduling, because the way that means you have 7 days from November 15th to have your organizational meeting. That means the latest you could have it is November 22nd. So that will not be in December because they removed the December reference in the legislation.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Edwards. I think we thought that maybe it was covered off in 3.2.1, but Trustee Morton.
Thank you. So I'm looking back to the year since 2010 when I have been there, and whether it's an election year or not, that organizational meeting has always taken place the first week of December. And I really like meetings in November because in the past we've had professional development, we've had onboarding sessions, and I think those onboarding sessions serve a purpose, and having them prior to the organizational meeting is a good idea. So do we want to change that wording? Are organizational meetings really going to change to November in 2022, 2026?
Trustee Edwards.
And I, you know, I don't mind that too, except now the legislation has changed that you have to have it within 7 days of the start of the term, and the start of the term is November 15th. So we have no choice but to change the organizational meeting as it reflected in the new legislation. Now it hasn't been passed, but there's, my understanding is that it more likely will change because the municipal act has already changed. So that's my concern there. And so I was wondering, do we change it now? Because more than likely they're seeing that it will, the House rises December 9th, and they're looking that this bill will pass. It's gone from second reading into committee. So that's your line by line reading, and that it more than likely will pass, especially that those changes, considering they're already reflected in the municipal act, to come into effect. So do we change our bylaw now or not?
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Trustee Barrett.
And I would suggest that that we should wait in order to be able to change the bylaw. If Dawn is correct, and I have no doubt that she is, that it's going to be coming forward on December the 9th. If I'm listening to Patrick Cotter, that with all the other in going to public, etc., if it does change, Donna, then I would suggest then we alter it at that point when it comes back to the committee. I'm a little concerned about putting something in a bylaw that hasn't happened yet, but agree that if it does happen, that it does have to take place. The rules have changed, and it's quite clear in the suggestion that that organizational meeting will have to take place in November. It can't wait till December. You'll be outside of the legislation if it passes according. So I think we should wait If it does change between now and when it comes back to the committee, then we can alter it at such a point and incorporate the language that you suggested. But we wouldn't have a choice, Donna. You're correct. We've discussed this at OPS ad nauseum. It would require organizational meetings prior to the end of November. So that the tradition that we have, and I agree, Carolyn, I've been around longer than that. That tradition is going to end on the altar of legislation. So
I have a question. Sorry, Trustee Crawford, I will come to you, but why doesn't 3.2.1 cover that? Because it already talks about the organizational meeting after a municipal election will be held 7 days after the start of the term of the board. So I think it covers it, but Trustee Crawford, go ahead.
Mine was I was going to make a suggestion that is there a way of having this document in front of us at the same time as having the group in front of us? Because I'm trying to follow the document and use my Zoom meeting as well at the same time. Can that be done?
Do you have a print? You don't have it printed off, Trustee Crawford?
I have it printed off, but when I put it on, then this part of it disappears. And then to get back to it, I have to come back to unmute myself. I just wonder, can we not have the document in front of us at the same time as we've done before? If it can't be done, just say so and I'll struggle with it.
Trustee Edwards?
Just to say, Chair Thorne, he's asking for the document to be shared on the screen.
It can be shared on the screen for sure. Patrick?
Do I need an interpreter? So what's wrong?
No, I think it can be. It can be. So I think people are looking at that, Trustee Crawford. I think they're looking into whether or not they can share that. I think they probably can, but
yeah. It's just that Donna
but it's going to take a minute see if we can get that up.
Just to confirm, just Chair Stone, do we want to share at 3.2? Is that what we?
Yeah, 3.2, page 12 of Appendix A, Rob.
Got it.
Because we're going to be moving through the whole document, theoretically.
So, Trustee Stone, I just had a couple of comments. First, I wanted to clarify something that Trustee Barrett said about going out to consultation. The comments we had at the start of the meeting about going on to consultation were in relation to the package on the human rights and the workplace harassment policy. They weren't related to this document. So this document, we'll come back to committee, but once the committee approves it, it will go to to standing and board. So this document won't go out for public consultation. That's not the plan anyway. So I just wanted to clarify that because I just want to make sure there was no misunderstanding there.
And Patrick, did you think that 3.2.1 covers what Donna is talking about with the organizational meeting?
It doesn't reference a date, so I understand the mischief that the members are concerned about, which is that obviously in those years it may not be in December, but in the way it's drafted 3.2.1, we don't reference December. So. But I understood Trustee Edwards was also concerned about the order, maybe wanted to flip 3.2.2 and 3.2.1, which would be no problem if that's an issue.
Trustee Edwards?
Yeah, that was my suggestion, is just because because one comes after the other, and the first one reads it always happens in December, and then you're talking about election year. If we flip them, then that would cover it. But yeah, I agree that the concept is covered under the 3.21 or 3. Whatever it is. But it's the order that may be confusing as you read it. That's all.
Okay, so I don't think that's a problem switching that, Patrick. Okay, great. Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Any further comments on this? I can't see everybody now. Unfortunately.
I think Dawn is the only one with her hand up, but maybe lagging. So.
Who is? Sorry?
but it might be lagging. Now
Was it Dawn?
It's gone.
Oh, okay. Okay, because I only have 6 people on my screen now. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you, Trustee Edwards. We are going to move on to, I think, Trustee Morton, you had a question as well and a point about the bylaws. You're on mute, Carolyn.
Sorry. My other question was in regards to page 19, 5.12.10, and declaring a conflict of interest. I'm just thinking that the wording is a little bit confusing. If one trustee declares conflict, then the number to pass a motion is reduced by 1, meaning 5 people voting for something would mean it passes. But then if the chair votes, we've got 10 people voting, it could be 5-5, and that vote of 5 people is not going to pass. It's going to mean defeated motion. So I'm just thinking, is that a little confusing?
Patrick, did you want to comment on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the language, I'm happy to obviously redraft it at the will of the committee. I think the intention was around the conflict was to make it clear that whether it was a conflict, that was going to be, for voting purposes, that would be treated as an abstention. That was the intention of the clause. So I'll leave it to the members to decide whether that's clear, but that's certainly what was the intention behind the draft.
I think the line, the number to pass a motion is reduced by 1, is where my conflict lies.
Trustee Lundquist.
So I actually don't disagree with that. I think it does potentially lead to some confusion. And I think it's an easy fix, honestly. If you declare a conflict, you must abstain from voting and it will be recorded as an abstention. That's it. I don't know that it needs the rest of it because I think that's where it gets confusing. And in terms of a tie vote, that gets addressed in a different place anyway. So
we just delete the last, really it's just deleting the sentence, the last sentence that starts when a member.
To me, that makes sense because you still get the point of if you declare a conflict, you're abstaining. And then the rest of it gets addressed by the other rules, which is probably more appropriate anyway.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Barrett.
Well, it's not a sword I'm going to die on or a hill I'm going to die on, but we had a lot of conversations with the parliamentarian Lori Luckenach, and she made it very clear on what the ramifications are with regards to abstentions. So that last line, I think, is there in order to be able to potentially disarm any concerns about how many votes then are required to be able to vote. I don't disagree with Trustee Lundquist. It's also found in other areas, but I just thought it was kind of nice to understand if there's a conflict of interest, you now have a board of 9 or 8 or 7, and the subsequent voting is as per. But it's not a hill I'm going to die on. It's just kind of nice when it's all together, because this is one of those areas that create some conflict or misunderstanding is probably a better word when it comes to taking a vote when conflicts are declared. So, but anyway, it's not a sword I'm going to die on. So,
thank you, Trustee Barrett. Trustee Lundquist.
I take that point, and I think that the way around it then is potentially keeping the language there and just indicating that, you know, in the event of a tie vote, I don't have the language in front of me, Patrick, and I apologize, but really that practically speaking, just adding, and if you want to keep it, adding another line, making it clear that that I'm struggling with it. I'm going to just try to write something and send it by chat because I think it'll be more clear than my brain is as I try to express it. So I do think that sometimes it's helpful to have things there so there's no question about where to go back and forth. But I do recognize Carolyn's concern. So I think maybe if we keep it and address Michael's concern, which is also valid, then we just add a line that indicates that nothing in this provision is meant to alter the status, whatever it is, whatever. help me, Patrick. That's your job.
You're trying to say wouldn't alter the normal rules around tie and that kind of thing? Is that what?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Would that be a good solution? To me, that seems like it addresses Trustee Barrett's concern and Trustee Morton's concern.
Yeah, we can certainly add something like that to the draft. That it would be, nothing, the recording of the vote and the results will be treated in the normal course. So maybe something like that.
Trustee Morton, you're good with that?
Yeah, I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood there's a little bit of ambiguity there.
Okay, and while we're on this, I think it's through Patrick's Rules of Order. Okay, Robert's Rules of Order that a chair does not have to vote in a tie, but can choose to vote in a tie, but they are not obligated to do that.
Yeah, we have that. It's in the, I could pull up the section, but we have that in here.
Yeah.
And, okay. Unlike Roberts, though, the Education Act does give the chair the right to vote. So, the procedures around this are not going to trump the chair's rights under the Education Act. So it's really a matter of protocol that the chair won't vote, until the end. And then typically only if it affects the result. But that's really the chair's discretion. The chair may, for the benefit of the community, want to vote on a matter that doesn't affect the result, to make it unanimous or whatever, to express opposition. And certainly the Education Act allows that, but protocol would suggest that they wouldn't vote unless it affects the result, which means they can vote if it would convert a win to a tie, or they can vote to convert a tie to a win.
Thank you. Trustee Barrett.
Yeah, and I would agree, Patrick, that is outlined elsewhere in the bylaws. I'm not going to try and find it either, but it is there. But it also is part of that, suggesting that, if the chair is taking place in the debate or moving or seconding a motion, they also have to yield the chair's position in order to be able to do so. So, but yeah, we kind of discussed that with the governance, Lori Luckenach sessions as well. So, and I think that the language corresponds with not only what we heard that night, but also more importantly with the Education Act and and then Roberts as well. So, okay.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Okay, we will move on. Are there any other comments to be made on the bylaws?
I think Paul had more about Section 5.
Okay, yeah, I see his hands up. Okay, thank you. Trustee Crawford.
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to come back to me. I prefer that document is up. We're still on 5, aren't we?
You're on Section 5? Yeah.
Yeah. And my comments and my notes were on Section 5.
Yeah, so Rob, I think
that was on my screen a minute ago.
Page 18 and 19, Rob, would be 5.12.6 and 5.12.7. Yeah, you got it right there. Perfect.
Okay, that should... it doesn't have the ability to move on my screen. I'm going to leave this on so you can hear me.
Can you toggle, Rob, to Trustee Crawford's written comment there? Do you have that open? Yeah, there it is.
Okay, I guess part of the problem is maybe I can explain it and you have it in front of you. So we put that in there. What we have here is, as we were discussing before, that we wanted to make this as democratic as possible. And yet you have in here a member who has not spoken to a motion may move that debate on the motion be closed and that the pending motion be put to a vote. Such a motion is not debatable. So I'm suggesting to take that out And when you go to the original document, the one that we're replacing, we had put in there that each member may speak for, correct me if I'm wrong here, Trustee Barrett, for 4 minutes and 2 minutes. One of the reasons we put that in there is so that debate wouldn't be interrupted by previous question or by somebody calling for the vote prior to everyone speaking to it. Is everybody following me on that?
I am following you. I'm hoping everybody's following you.
Yeah. So I'm suggesting to take that out. And if we want to put a restriction or limitation on it, then we would put it in as a comment that each member may speak twice during the debate, once for 5 minutes and once for 2 minutes, or words to that effect. That stops the somebody talking indefinitely or taking up too much time. But what you don't want to do, you do not want to cut off debate. And just putting it in a simple form, there's only 11 of us. We're a small board. If all of us had put our name up to speak, but somebody after half the people had spoken, or at any time, could say that I move what they call previous question, but forget that. I move that we call for the vote. Therefore, saying that the people who are waiting to speak would be cut off. Now, we don't want that. I'm assuming.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. I'm just going to go to Trustee Barrett.
I'm not disagreeing with Trustee Crawford in the sense of wanting to be able to have the intention not to limit or stifle debate. And I recognize too that there's a difference between a smaller board and a large board. Unfortunately, when, and I have done this when I'm chairing OPSMA, for example, with 62 people around the table and everybody speaks once, we are going to be there for 3 days to determine what the agenda looks like. So, but I don't disagree that in a smaller board, however, if we do take that to its limit, that means each of us can speak for 6 minutes. It means that you can talk for up to, with 11 people on the board, 66 minutes on a single topic. So, and we do have limits of 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. in our element. I'm just suggesting, I don't have an issue, because I understand and I agree with Trustee Crawford's concept of not wanting to limit or stifle debate. I would just suggest that there are rules within our board that talks about speaking twice on an issue, 4 minutes and 2 minutes. We don't abide by that. We constantly speak on the issues. And if that's the case, I would just suggest that we should all recognize that that's in the bylaws and that should be enforceable by whoever is speaking to the topic, that we should not be recognizing people if they have spoken twice on the issue. So I don't want to limit people, but I also don't want to have limitless debate when we go round and round and round in circles. I don't think that does us as members of the board well. I don't think it's fair to staff. I also don't think it's fair to the public. We need to be able to make decisions. If we reinforce the 4 and 2, then I don't disagree with Trustee Crawford. Let's not limit debate.
Well, if I may, Madam Chair, because if I could build on that, my suggestion was to put that back in here. That wording was in the original one, and I believe that we had settled on 4 and 2 or 5 and 2, but it doesn't matter what it is. It limits the debate. It's also an equality situation that everyone gets the same amount of time. One thing you don't want to do is take away anybody's rights. And one of the rights that an elected member has is to debate. So you don't want to be cutting it off. And of course, the chair should say, your time is up, and I believe that was written into the other one. I'd like to ask Council Cotter, that wording was in the previous one. We could put it in here easy enough, correct?
Yeah, the timing was in the previous one, correct. The reason why the draft is presented as this is because of the concern that Trustee Barrett raised, which it's not being enforced. So if the board wants to have that time limit in there, then I think that's obviously the decision of the committee. But then the time limits will have to. Then I think the time limits will have to be enforced, as will the number of, some people may want to speak 3 times, and so that's why I took it out, to allow more free debate in the draft. The other point I wanted to make is, to your point on Roberts. Roberts we've got Roberts filling the gap here. So even if we remove this clause around calling the previous question, that will not prevent someone from bringing a motion to call a previous question. So if it's the will of the committee to say you can't bring a motion to call a previous question, we should say that expressly rather than leaving it silent. So that would be my suggestion. If we do want to have that, we should say, the board does not recognize a motion to call a previous question.
Well,
Paul, sorry, Paul, just a second. I have somebody else's hand up. I'm going to move to Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Stone. So I have to admit, I vacillated a little bit on this. I've gone back and forth repeatedly because I do see the value in it, potentially. So I do recognize we have a smaller board, and that's important. I also recognize that it's important that all trustees have an opportunity to voice their views. But I'm picturing, where people get up and say the same things again and again and again and again, or from meeting to meeting to meeting. And at some stage, I do think that a rule like this may be reasonable. And so, I was going to actually say some of what Patrick said, although not all of it, which is that is a right that exists in Robert's rules, and for a pretty good reason, in my view. So I don't see the need to depart from it, but I'm also aware that, whatever bylaws we pass, they should be consistent and consistently applied to everybody. And our bylaws were not consistently applied. So we had this 5 minute or whatever it was, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, and that never came up. But I don't actually think we've had a lot of experience with people curtailing debate either. And so I wonder if we're spending a lot of time arguing about something that really is nothing, because practically speaking, a motion to end a debate isn't debatable, but you vote on it and it's a majority. So if the majority of the trustees feel like the horse has been, I don't want to say flogged because I'll upset some animal rights activists, and that's not my intention in any way, because I don't want to flog anything. But it seems to me that there is a practical reality of having something like this in the bylaws. I would actually prefer it stayed in, but not because I want to curtail debate, but because at some stage reason has to prevail. And I agree. Like, if some days we have very contentious agendas or there are lengthy things on the agenda, and 5 minutes might not be adequate for a discussion of it. Like, truly, I've heard everybody at this table speak for more than 5 minutes on something. So I'm not really in support of curtailing every discussion to 5 minutes. But I do think if you have 11 trustees with their hands up, and the only things that are being repeated are the same things, I don't know if that's a valuable use of people's time, including ours, but most importantly the public's and the staff who are forced to sit through that. So I don't want to remove it myself, and I think there is value in having it there, and I am very conscious of the fact that the second part of it is it takes a majority of trustees to actually move a motion like that forward. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. We have to keep in mind here, we're talking about a board meeting now, a formal board meeting. If we were in committee, there aren't any restrictions in a committee except what we put in ourselves during that. That's what committees are for, to allow free discussion. I don't think in my 20 years I've ever seen a situation at board where we had to cut off debate because people were talking for more than a few minutes. So the situation doesn't exist. And as I said before, it's what's more important here is that everyone gets a similar opportunity to speak. You wouldn't want 6 people to speak and then cut off the other 4 that wanted to speak or 5 that wanted to speak. That's the important principle here, is everyone gets an opportunity to speak. I'd say this board has a problem with not debating and not talking enough and not getting into things enough. We don't have a problem with people talking too much, and if they're doing it at committee, then they happen to have a right to do it at committee. But this is a board situation that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I was just gonna repeat what's been said before. I think we have been good and we have been open, but I think guidelines need to exist that we can fall back to in situations that it's needed. So I would support it going back in, or the 4 and 2 portion going back in.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Trustee Edwards.
I somewhat go back and forth on this stuff, but I have seen it, and I might disagree with you, Paul. In my term, I have seen a question called to stifle debate, but I've also seen a question called because we have gone around in circles, and everybody is saying the same thing or similar things. So, which is not a good time. So I do agree that we should have a healthy debate, and everybody should have a right to speak. But I have a problem with putting the 2 and 4 minutes, because trying to chair a meeting, that means the chair has to have a timer. And times everybody, as soon as somebody sets a timer every time in order to be fair and so forth, and that is very difficult to do. So I don't like adding the time in, but I think that, that everybody has the right to speak to a motion at least twice. And then at that point in time, if we're, then maybe the motion to call the question is there, but I'm having a problem adding what we had in before, because we'll have people, and you have to recognize that we as a board maybe not do that now, but the next election, who knows? And they're going to be looking at these and say, I have 4 minutes and 2 minutes to speak. I want my 4 minutes to speak. So it just depends on the individual. So I'm kind of liking the way it is, the way we've got it. And because I don't think it's going to, and it's also up to the chair to ensure that everybody has a voice around the table. And I guess from that point of view, I have a question for those that are definitely government. If I know it's not debatable, but can the chair overrule it if they say that not everybody has spoken? Just a question.
The chair can control it, yes, but the chair is going to rely on the bylaws to do that. If you were to leave this wording the way that it is, the chair could say after someone called the question, go ahead and call the question, and a majority could cut off debate even though everyone who wanted to speak hasn't spoken. I think what we're arguing back and forth here is which is a worst situation, to cut people off from speaking. And I'm talking about people who haven't spoken yet. I'm not talking about people that have had their time. And we did debate this quite a bit a few years ago. And the best solution is to have the restrictions there, because the restrictions don't just keep it down to something, but they also allow people to speak, because it's more important that you don't cut off anybody's right to speak.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Lundquist.
Yeah, I apologize because I don't want to go back and forth on this, but I do have a concern about the idea that we're going to impose an arbitrary 4 minutes. So I understand we have to manage meetings and whatnot, but we're talking about equity in the abstract. And if you're talking about equity in practice, then I can foresee this being a problem for someone who has a communication barrier in some way, as in terms of disability or a language barrier or anything like that. And so to me, this arbitrary number of a few minutes might actually impact equity in a really negative way. So I'm opposed to that. I would rather we come up with a reasoned process that allows people voice, but also gives the ability of the chair to manage a debate that has got out of hand, essentially, because really that's what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about the everyday functioning of the board. We're talking about when there's something contentious or something difficult, or it's taking a long time and we're revisiting and going back and forth. So, like, to me, we're making a lot of this, and I don't know that it's, in my mind, as problematic as doing the reverse, which is moving back to an arbitrary number that might actually significantly impact and impede somebody's rights too. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Are there any further comments? I don't see any more hands up. So I'm wondering if we need to take a vote on this.
Trustee Barrett has his hand up, Chair Stone, sorry.
Sorry, he doesn't. Oh, sorry, Michael. I can't see everybody, so you just have to let me know.
That was sorry. That came up at the last minute because I wanted to take my additional 2 minutes in order to be able to talk about this.
Okay.
Yes, starting now. So we have not enforced the 4 minutes and 2 minutes. We've not discussed two people speaking out, only twice, people only speaking twice. We have gone on for half hours of debates. We've had questions that have lasted 35 and 40 minutes. And we either put up with it or not. And I think that, to be fair, as a board, we have allowed lots of opportunity for debate. But I would suggest that because I'm building on what other trustees are saying, is if we don't want 4 minutes and 2 minutes, there's no sense in putting it in if we're not going to enforce it. And I would suggest that no chair is going to have the ability to enforce the 4 minutes and 2 minutes. I don't think it's fair on the chair. But then on the other side, I still think that if we use Robert's Rules of Order, then I'll go back to what someone else said. If we use Robert's Rules of Order as a methodology, then we should keep this in, because at the end of the day, the majority of the board will determine whether or not we continue the debate. I don't disagree with the comments that are being made, but it's one of those elements that let's move on. Let's not put the times in. Keep this in. And it's going to be up to the majority of the board. And if 6 people out of 11 say it's time to end debate, the majority has spoken. We've heard the voice. So that was my 2 minutes.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Trustee Crawford.
Well, it's because of Roberts that I brought this up. Roberts doesn't say that you can cut off debate. Roberts says that individuals have rights, and they only have a few rights. And one of those rights is to debate, to make motions, to attend meetings. There's only 5 of them. And they cannot be taken away under any circumstances. What we're confusing here is that when we're in meetings and someone has had their time to debate, everybody's had an equal opportunity to debate. So you're not taking anything away from any individual member. This comes from Roberts. And then Roberts would allow you to have a 2/3 vote to stop debate, but after the individuals have had their rights. And by putting the restriction in, it looks after that. It ensures that everybody's going to get the same amount of time. It might be difficult to police, but it gives you an out that people can't talk forever. And it also prevents people from being cut off. So, yeah, use Roberts, but go back and read it carefully. And if you want, I'll send you some page numbers that led me to this. And you can see that you should be protecting individual rights. And in fact, there's a sentence at the beginning of these bylaws that says we're going to be democratic and that we're going to have equal discussion.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Could we add to what you want to replace or add to the other bylaws that you said delete, but you said you'd be happy with also just adding it to them?
What I'm going to suggest, and I'm assuming we're going to have other discussions about this, whether it's standing there. I'm just suggesting to Patrick, who's done, and Gillian, who's put all the work into this, is that the wording that was in the original one, the wording that says that each member will be able to speak a certain number of times and up to a certain number of minutes. That's your restriction, but that restriction is for everybody, so it's equal. And it prevents anybody from cutting off debate until those people have had that equal opportunity. So I'm asking that these two be taken out and that be put in.
Okay, because in your email, you said replace with or place within same bylaws.
That's right, because the previous bylaws read the way that I would like them to read. The short version. It's got the parliamentary authority in it, and it's got the restrictions of as how many times you can speak. And the reason we put it in there is to avoid debate being cut off. And the argument against cutting off debate was, if you don't restrict it, people will talk forever. Well, they can't talk forever if you put into your bylaws that they're restricted to twice and they're restricted to certain minutes. Now, those minutes and that thing can be changed at the time that you go into debate. You can make a suggestion that they be made more or less, but you don't take away anybody's opportunity to speak. You can also say, when you're at a board meeting, we're going to go into a committee. We're going to go into a committee form, which opens up debate. So there's already ways of handling this without cutting off people's opportunity to speak. And I think you've heard enough from me tonight.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Patrick.
So if I might make a suggestion then in terms of going forward, in terms of, we could enshrine the expectation, right? So it's expected that, members will, in the normal course, members may speak up to 2 times on any given motion. Forget the timeline, just say that's sort of the normal expectation. And then in terms of ending debate, we could up the threshold to 2/3 and then make a general policy statement that, this rule is not to be used arbitrarily to curtail debate or we could add some sort of principle in there as to give an indication of when the board's going to use that motion to curtail debate. So that's just my thoughts on how we could move forward. We could just enshrine the expectation everybody speaks twice, remove the time limit, and up the threshold to 2/3, and make clear that what the intention of that is. Would be one way to move forward to try to bridge the gap here.
Trustee Crawford.
The 2/3 raises the standard, but it still takes away the opportunity for 1/3 to debate. The idea is to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to debate. You can restrict how long they debate or how often they debate, as long as it's the same for everyone. And in fact, some of them say that the chair watches to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to debate and that people who haven't debated will be given the first opportunity to debate, and he's very careful, he or she is very careful about not cutting off debate before everyone who wishes to speak has spoken.
Well, I think that might be one way to deal with it. We could say that the motion, such a motion won't be brought unless, everyone who's had a chance to speak has spoken at least once or at least twice, whatever we want to say there. That might be one way to cover it off.
Okay, then I agree with that, Patrick. If you put that wording in there, and we'll have an opportunity to have a look at it next time and see if it suits us, at least it will be closer to what I'm trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Morton.
Thank you. I'm just thinking we're going back and forth. We're talking about 2 minutes, 4 minutes, everyone having an opportunity to speak. Don't we have confidence in a chair being able to control that level of, everyone wants an opportunity to participate in the discussion. The chair wants that, but I would have confidence in the chair being able to limit without being specific, more of a general comment.
Thank you, Trustee.
We have bylaws.
Thank you, Trustee Morton. Is there any further discussion? Are people in agreement with Patrick's suggestion of adding that people, you cannot curtail debate until everyone has had at least one chance to speak? Everyone is in agreement with that. Trustee Barrett.
No, I only just want to clarify a little bit because, and I know, Patrick, you'll work this out. I don't know where you disappeared on my screen. There you are, Patrick. That I'm sure Patrick will work out the right language. But can't say till everybody has the opportunity to speak, because maybe individuals aren't going to want to speak on the subject. So it'll be more of the case. I'm sure Patrick will work out. We'll have the opportunity to have spoken on the issue as opposed to have had to speak on the issue. So
yeah,
just a nuance. So.
Okay, so I am going to suggest that we do leave that with Patrick. I think we've worked that out, and we can put the wording in there that might make everybody happy. And we're going to move on, and we'll see that back later, Patrick. I don't see everybody on the screen again, so I don't know if anybody else has their hand up. So no, thank you. Oh, there we go.
Yes, I'll do that. Sorry, I was trying to speak there, but I had my mic and my video off. So,
okay.
Yes, no problem.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Any further comments on the bylaws? Okay, seeing none. We are going to, we've got, what time is it? It's 22:08. We could move on to the code of conduct. Okay.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. I did have more comments on the bylaws. Are we going to be working with them again?
Well, I think they're going to have to come back again because we've got Patrick's rewording things. But
I'll save the other part until another meeting. Thanks.
Trustee Barrett.
Could we have Trustee Crawford speak to the bylaws, because this just goes on forever? And this is no offense to you, Trustee Crawford, but if we're going to come back next, I'd like to understand your further concerns now, Trustee Crawford, and deal with them now. If we could, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Trustee Crawford.
Okay, then I'm going to leave my mic on and put my comments up so that I can follow along. One of the general comments I had is that when we started this, it was to revise and consolidate the bylaws that had been separated out of our bylaws and given to the trustees. Am I being heard?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've started here is we've started to go into procedures, meeting procedures that we didn't have in the bylaws before. So we're making them much longer than they would be. Plus, I think it's a good idea to go into meeting procedures. They're not usually part of your bylaws. They're done separately. And just that we're already into them, is it possible to separate the procedures part of it and do it separate rather than beginning to add it to what we're doing here?
Council Cotter, I'm going to let you take that.
Yeah, I mean, the intention was sort of have everything in one place, but you know, there would be nothing, I guess, you know, improper of having another procedural bylaw where we'd pull it all out. Most of it's in section 5, so it really would be pulling section 5 out. There may be a few other odds and ends, but I think it'd be pulling section 5 out, and it would be bylaw number 2, I guess, or something, or the procedural bylaw. So we certainly could do that. At the will of the committee.
Well, I'm thinking, if I can speak to that, I know we're not doing this we're doing this sort of informally, but it's not a bad way to do it for us to be able to respond as soon as someone has said something, because I'm thinking of the time element of it. Plus, it's a different project, really, to set up procedural or meeting bylaws, and it could be done at another time, although you've made a heck of a good start here. Would there be any disagreement to dealing with the procedural bylaws or the meetings part of it separately?
Trustees? Are people opposed to that? Trustee Edwards?
One of the issues that we've had before, and it's sort of 6 or half a dozen the other, is that everything's all over the place. This puts everything in bylaw 1, everything's there. I realize it sounds more like procedure, but it's covered. A lot of this stuff is covered under Robert's Rules of Order, but I really have a hesitancy breaking them up, because we've had this concern that we've had 12 bylaws and people are having difficulty when we've got one bylaw, everything's there, all the expectations are there. I kind of like it. This particular in section 5, I like it in there.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Just a second, sorry, Trustee Crawford, I'm going to go to Trustee Lundquist.
So I sometimes think we forget that the purpose of the bylaws is not just to govern our behavior, but to give the public some insight into what we do and how it gets done. And to me, the clearer a document is, the better off we are. So the idea of separating it out isn't appealing to me, because I think already that there's a disconnect between knowledge of the board and the way we operate. And I mean the Board of Trustees, not the board generally as an educational entity, and the public. And so what I actually like about the drafts is that it puts everything in one place. It's more accessible. I mean, I still think some of the language needs to be looked at in terms of plain language, but practically speaking, the idea of separating it out doesn't appeal to me in the context of this, because this is all the public is going to have to understand the way we operate. So that's my thought on that.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Barrett.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat it. I would agree with both Donna and Trustee Lundquist. And all I would suggest is that, in the role of OPSPA, what I see happening in the disharmony that happens to the board is that there is an inability to be able to merge both procedure and bylaws, and boards are getting themselves into trouble. We're not writing these bylaws for the group of individuals that are sitting around here. I would agree with the concept. We're writing it not only for our public to understand what our role is, for future candidates to be able to understand what their role is, in order to be able to ensure that we have as a governance model that works. So I agree with both Trustee Edwards and Lundquist that I like them together, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Any further comments? I would, Paul, are you putting a motion forward then? Because we've got 3 people and maybe more who would like them together. So I'm not sure how you want to proceed with this. Are you there, Paul? You're on mute, Paul. I think we might have lost Paul. Trustee Templeton.
I'm actually going to agree with it. I know when I came in, or being new and going to the procedures, policy and everything, having it all in one place makes a lot more sense to me than pulling everything out all over the place, because now you're jumping all over. And it's just clearer when you're reading through procedures and policy all in one location.
Thank you, Trustee Templeton. Trustee Crawford.
It's good that we're having a discussion about it, but I wasn't talking about separating it. It's just that they don't belong in the bylaws. And what we were doing is we were revising the bylaws, and then we got started on the procedural bylaw, and it was as though we couldn't stop. And now we're into discussing what takes place during a meeting. Like somebody makes a motion and someone seconds it, and then there's precedence of motions. I'm not saying it's not important to us. It is. In fact, we used to publish the meeting procedures on a separate document, and it was part of our agenda. You could sit there and read it, and it's a good thing to have. I'm only suggesting that we deal with it separately. It will give us more time on the bylaws, and even maybe have a subcommittee to put them together. It's a suggestion that you can think of. I'm not going to make a motion to separate them out, but I hope people understand what I'm saying is that we need to know what to do during a meeting. But if you put procedural rules in your bylaws, then they become bylaws, and it gets to be very confusing. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And that was one of the main things I wanted to say about what we had there. And
okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. Was there anything else on the bylaws that you wanted to talk about?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, so trustees, are there any further comments on these bylaws tonight? Because do people want to move on to the code of conduct? You got 10 minutes left. Yeah, actually we have more. We started later. So let's move on to the code of conduct.
Will we be able to put it up?
It would just depend on the section in which we'd like to put up.
Okay, thank you, Robert. We'll put up the section when we talk about it. So Trustee Barrett.
Thank you. Just seeking some clarification on page 64, 6.28, the section on the chair of the board is the spokesperson. So I've read this a few times, and every time I read it, I get more confused. Because it does talk about that the chair of the board is a spokesperson to the public on behalf of the board. No other trustee shall speak, blah, blah, blah. But then it says, when individual trustees express their opinions in public, they must make it clear that they are not speaking on behalf of the board and must otherwise comply with the code of conduct. I almost find this a little bit contradictory. Because trying to understand the process by which when and if an individual trustee expresses the opinion, I think what we're trying to say here is that after a decision is made, that you have to uphold the decision. That's because it's under the section upholding decisions. But that one line, when the individual trustees express their opinion, it almost sounds like we're giving people the permission to be able to speak on an item after a decision is made. So I'm just seeing some contradiction in that. I think what we're trying to say is, prior to a decision, you absolutely have the right to be able to have an opinion. So I'm just wondering if they're kind of mixed a little bit here.
Okay, so you're talking about basically that last line there too, when individual trustees express their opinions in public. I think in public is a problem too, or?
Well, I mean, it's under the section of upholding decisions.
Right.
So we're saying you can't speak on behalf of the board, but then it says you can express your opinion, and then you have to make it clear you're expressing your opinion as an individual trustee.
Right.
To me, that's contradictory with upholding the decision.
Right. So it's maybe saying to someone that you might even be talking to, this, I didn't agree with this. That wasn't my vote. I wouldn't have voted that way, or this is my opinion, but I uphold what the board decision is. I'm going to go to Trustee Crawford. I'm going to go to Trustee Lundquist.
I understand the concern, and I've thought about this a great deal because I actually don't think the board has the right to curtail a trustee in some respects. So absolutely, the part about if a decision has been made, your obligation as a trustee is to uphold the decision of the board. There's no question about that, right? That is how a board functions. But I'm going to give an example to sort of illustrate what my concern is. So there have been boards in the province who have done what I would describe as kind of heinous things, frankly. And if this board did that and it conflicted with my own ethical stance, I don't know that I would not speak out, and I'm not sure that, I think we're walking a fine line because we absolutely have charter rights to expression. That doesn't disappear because you're a trustee, and certainly you may have to curtail your manner of speech and all of that, and I support that. I understand the obligations, but I do think that a trustee absolutely has a right to speak to issues in their community, to members of the public, etc. If somebody asks me how I voted on something, I'm going to tell them, right? I'm going to do that, but I would certainly also say the board made a different determination, and it is my obligation to support that because of X, Y, and Z. So I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but I do think that we're walking a fine line here, because I think the fact that you are a trustee doesn't take away every bit of voice you have. Certainly, I would not go out and say, the board needs to do X, Y, and Z, or the board should have done this or that. I wouldn't ever do that, but I do think that, a little bit of sound judgment in order to not run afoul of our obligations as members of a board of trustees, which is, charged with collective decision making. So recognizing that and the requirement to abide by that collective decision making, I don't think necessarily results in the inability of a trustee to express some things. Carefully express some things. And so I don't know how to fix this because I recognize that its location actually might be a bit of the issue, but maybe it's not all of the issue, and perhaps I'm missing something. I just know that, I have posted things on Twitter or whatnot, and some people have taken exception to it. I'm very clear that my opinions are my own. They are not issues that the board has decided on at any particular stage, and I'm going to continue to do that, regardless of what the code says, because I would assert my constitutional right to do that. And that isn't going to change just because a code of conduct says otherwise.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Crawford.
The reason it's contradictory is because it's the way it's written in the Education Act. And so it would have to be contradictory because we do have the right to speak, but it says we must let people know that we're speaking for ourselves. So there's nothing wrong with the way this is worded. It says you must let them know that you're not speaking on behalf of the board, but you certainly have a right to speak. In fact, there'll be times ethically when you'll have to speak because maybe what you don't agree with the board is something that should be spoken about. And let's face it, they wouldn't stop us from going to the government or going to the ethics commissioner or someone else. The only thing I don't like on this one is that after that, on behalf of the board, in red letters, I guess it's, and must otherwise comply with this code of conduct. That shouldn't be there. Maybe somewhere else it might say that we must comply with the code of conduct, but not here, because the code of conduct is about two main things: transparency and confidentiality, and those two things are contradictory. So I would suggest striking the red lettering from that and put it somewhere else. In fact, I think it appears somewhere else anyway.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Barrett.
Yeah, thank you. I just want some clarification because, you know, and maybe through you, Madam Chair, to Council Cotter, I don't know of anything in the Education Act that says that as individual trustees, we have a right to be able to speak as long as we make it known that we're speaking for ourselves. That's not the Education Act I remember, but I will not say that I am an absolute, have the whole Education Act memorized. I don't believe that that's what the education says with regards to the chairperson and who is the spokesperson for the chair. I don't think there's anything there that says there's a context. So I'm not asking for an answer right now, Council Cotter, because I'll do my own kind of look at it, but I don't see that there. And whereas I can appreciate Trustee Lundquist's opinion that we have no right to be able to curtail discussion, to me, that interpretation creates a significant slippery slope for the board, because I can think of a number of decisions that this board has made that was passed by the board that not necessarily everybody agreed with, but we have consistently been supporting those decisions. And I just think that interpretation has some slippery slopes, but we could probably argue that one forever and ever, Trustee Lundquist, and it'll probably be argued long after, you know, somewhere, but it's a slippery slope in my mind, not recognizing what the role is. I think that for me, the problematic piece in this is that line when individual trustees express their opinions in public. I believe that shouldn't be in this section, because this is about upholding a decision. So I think that's the problematic piece that I see as contradictory. So.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. I'm going to move to Council Cotter. If you have a comment, either what Trustee Crawford suggested or what Trustee Barrett is suggesting to move that line to another area.
Well, I certainly think through you, Madam Chair, I certainly think the last line, the underline in red, doesn't really add anything. So to the extent it's confusing, I think that's fair to remove that. I can tell you what I was trying to do, but let's save time and just say whatever I was trying to do, it didn't achieve it. So let's delete it because I think it is confusing. I'm not sure that solves all the issues, but certainly that's one thing that I think is an easy fix.
And Trustee Barrett's suggestion of moving that line regarding the trustees to another area, do you think that's something we should do or could do, or wondering whether or not trustees agree with that? Maybe it is under the wrong heading, upholding decisions.
Yeah, well, we've also got to expand the debate, I guess, and bring this to a conclusion. 6.26 also says that a trustee may respectfully state his or her position on a resolution, provided it does not in any way undermine implementation of the resolution. So that's a similar, to that extent, it's a bit of redundancy there. You could say, yeah, look, the board passed it and I respect the board's decision. I voted the other way. Obviously, my vote didn't carry the day. that sort of thing. I'm not sure that 6.28 is meant to say anything different other than that. Really, it's, yeah, you can state how you voted, why you voted, or how you intend to vote. I'm not sure, I'm not sure we should get hung up on whether it's before or after. I think the point is, you have to say it's personal and that the board's decision stands, and you have to make sure that that's clear. So I think, I'm not sure that the line in 6.28, that's taken from the original draft as a 6.26, so I didn't change that. I did add that extra confusing language at the end of 6.28, but that's the original language, and there is a redundancy. So if it's clearer, 6.26 probably covers us. That's one solution, would be to delete from 6.28 and leave 6.26.
Yeah, now that you pointed it out, I'm almost wondering if it's redundant, right? You're sort of saying the same thing. So I'm going to call on Trustee Lundquist.
Yeah, I'm sorry, because I actually don't think it's redundant, because this is very specifically about a resolution, and there are other things that could be addressed by a trustee. So I don't see it as being redundant at all. So in fact, I agree that it's perhaps not best positioned in 6.28, but what if you took the final part, when individual trustees express their opinions in public, up to the end of code of conduct, why couldn't you put that at the end of 6.26 so you understand that it may be broader than just a resolution, but they still have an obligation to comply with the code and to make it clear they're not speaking on behalf of the board.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Just going to move to Trustee Edwards.
Yeah, I was having a problem with 6.28 because if we're talking about, one is talking about, the spokesperson for public, and we're talking about upholding a decision. So I was kind of thinking 6.28 was a bit of redundant here, and we already talked about in our bylaws that the chair is the spokesperson to the public on behalf of the board, unless somebody else. So I'm kind of having a problem with 6.28 being a little bit redundant and not really belonging here. 6.26, it does talk about, and again, because it's under the section of a resolution decision, I don't feel comfortable adding in another line there because we're talking specifically about a decision. If we have it somewhere else, then that would might be a different line that could be put in, and I'm trying to figure out where I would put it.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Trustee Crawford. Trustee Crawford.
Sorry, Madam Chair. No, I was thinking that 6.27 is could be taken out because each trustee shall comply with the board's consolidated bylaws, policies, and applicable procedures. That is so wide open that just about anybody could run off to the ethics commissioner and say so-and-so is not complying with such and such, and reach into all of those documents and find something in there. So I think 627 should be struck, and 626 and 628. I think they read the way they do because it does conform to the intent of the Education Act. And again, I had suggested to take out the red lettering at the end. Did we agree that we would take that out and must otherwise comply with this code of conduct?
Yes, I think we agreed to take that out.
So I'm suggesting 627 should be either struck or change that wording so it's not so wide open.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I was wondering if it would make sense to switch the order of 6.26 and 6.28, where the chair of the board section is first, and then the explaining of the rationale would be after, and taking, if you flip that, then you'd have the spokesperson being the board, and in 2.6 you'd have the exception if a trustee is speaking out against a resolution passed by the board. Would that make let that flow a little better in regards to how it's read and interpreted?
Well, I'm not sure if that changes it, Trustee Barnes. I'll call on other trustees to see what they think about that. To me, it doesn't change it too much, but how do the other trustees feel? I think the problem is still there. I think the problem of that one line of when individual trustees express their opinions in public is still there, and I think that is the line that's the problem. I know Trustee Lundquist suggested moving that line and put it under 6.26. So we've got a couple of suggestions, trustees.
And Chair, I would support that as well if you put that last line as part of 6.26.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Barnes. Patrick.
I mean, one option is, I hate to get extra wordy here, but maybe that's a way to start to try to solve this problem. When trustees express their opinions, they must do so in a manner that does not undermine the role of the chair in acting as the spokesperson for the board, and must make it clear that their opinions are their own. Would be one way to sort of make it clear that you can only express your own opinion. You can't, you can never transgress into the role of chair and speak on behalf of the board. So it says they must make it clear they're not, but I think where we're struggling is to say, well, what can they speak on? So maybe that's where we go and say, look, they can't. They can speak on matters before the board, but they can't usurp the role of the chair. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I thought that made it clear when you said are not speaking on behalf of the board. I think that would include the chair, but Trustee Crawford.
I was just thinking the same thing, that even though it starts out when individual trustees express their opinions in public, they must make it clear that they're speaking as an individual and not on behalf of the board.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. Are there any more comments on this? Seeing none, what I'm going to suggest is, Patrick, maybe you could put some rewording in there and bring it back to us. But
okay, I'll see what I can do. I think I understand the concerns. I'm not sure I can thread the needle, but I can at least make some suggestions. Maybe you'll have to get to a vote at some point, but I can at least have some options, maybe.
Right, maybe bring us back a couple of options. That'd be great. Trustee Crawford?
No, I was just going to ask either Patrick or a staff person to check the actual wording in the Education Act related to these, and that would solve the argument between Trustee Barrett and myself, and it might clarify this. I'm pretty sure it's stated in there as to what we should be doing.
I'll bring that back. I'll bring the exact language back with the proposed redraft.
Thanks very much.
Trustee Barrett.
It didn't see it as an argument, Chair Stone. Saw it as a good open debate, as we've been discussing. So it's good debate.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. And Paul, Trustee Crawford had the suggestion of 6.27 being deleted. Can I have any comments on that from trustees? Delete? I'm seeing some heads nod. Do we need to vote on this? Trustee Lundquist.
So, I mean, I have to admit, I'm always a little bit leery when something could lead to things that you don't anticipate. But when I read that, like, each trustee shall comply with the board's bylaws. We're required to do that. Policies and procedures. I don't actually understand what the issue is, because we have to do those things. So I'm puzzled.
I think we have to. I think the board has to state it too. You know, it may be in the wrong place, Nikki. Sorry, Trustee Lundquist. It may be in the wrong place, which is part of the confusion.
Yeah, so I think it probably is in the wrong place, but as a reality, it is a reality. It's I don't know how else to describe that. So do you have a suggestion as to where it might be moved more appropriately, Councillor Cotter? Because to me,
yeah, it should go with 6.3 to 6.6 in that integrity and dignity principles, probably like the general sort of, or 6 somewhere in the early part of 6, either the code of conduct itself, like it's really a foundational concept of the code, right?
Yeah.
So it probably goes as right under 6.2. Just go up a little bit, Rob, so we can see. Yeah, so I think it goes right under 6.2, because it's really a foundational statement. Now we could tighten up, applicable procedures if that's Trustee Crawford's concern. I think it's, there's some merit to that concern. What does that mean exactly? So I think we could maybe tighten that up to make it clear. Like, obviously there's lots of procedures that trustees aren't, there's lots of procedures that don't even apply. Like, I'm just thinking there's a few that obviously do, like there's maybe an expense policy. There's probably some kind of procedure, but there's probably not a lot of procedures that apply to trustees. That's probably the one where we need to bring some clarity.
Could we list them in an appendix, which policies apply? Because I understand I understand Trustee Crawford's concern, but I do think that, as you describe it, it is foundational, right? Like, we do have those obligations. And so I don't want to shy away from our obligations. I think that's the last thing any of us want to do. But I also recognize that the board, as a very large employer and educational institution, has all kinds of policies that don't apply to us as a trustee. And so is there some way to clarify what that is without making this unwieldy and unmanageable by listing them within the body? That's all. And
I think one thing maybe to do is draw a distinction between uphold and comply. There may be some that don't have a positive obligation on trustees, right? So trustees obviously have to uphold all board policies, but comply, I think, is maybe a little bit different. So maybe that's where we can tighten it up a little bit too.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to move to Trustee Crawford.
Well, I was just going to say that that wording that was just suggested would help to clarify it. And we can't go into everything. We know that we have to work within our bylaws, for instance. What was the wording that you suggested there, Patrick, about uphold and comply?
Suggested, change the word from comply
to uphold. I think uphold's a much better word, because I could interpret something in the policies or the bylaws that would be much different than another trustee might interpret it.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Morton.
Thank you. I'm looking at 6.27 that some people would like to negate, but would that also not fit? Oh, it's going back. I'm looking at 6.2 or 6.3, the integrity and principles. Wouldn't it fit there as well?
Trustee Morton, I didn't, so Trustee Morton, sorry, I didn't hear your numbers. Which number are you on?
Okay, so we did spend time on 6.27 and we decided that we could find a better place for that. Does that not fit into under integrity and dignity of office principles? So we're 6.3. So complying, adhering to the policies, doesn't that fit with the confidence and the ability and the integrity of the board?
Council Cotter?
Yeah, I think it could fit there too. So it's somewhere in the early part of 6. It's either, yes. Yeah, it's right there. So let me work that and come back with some good proposed draft language.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Barrett, did you have your hand up? No. Any other comments on 6.27? No further comments. Thank you. Moving on, does anybody else have anything else on the code of conduct? I don't see any hands up. So it's 8:17. So I am going to, what do I call this again? I am going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Maybe we should talk about the date of the next meeting.
Okay, sorry, I have 2 hands up. So
I'm just looking at the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Morton. Trustee Crawford?
No, I'm all for going to another meeting. I was afraid you were going to move the code of conduct along. And we did talk about this at a previous meeting, is that they're anticipating some changes in the regulations. So that would mean that we'd have to change our code of conduct anyway. But no, if we're going to have more meetings on this, that would be good for me.
Well, we would like to move it forward though. So I think it'll come back with the bylaws, but if we don't have anything further, or if there's small things that people can send through earlier, that would be better, because we need to, I think, start sending this to standing.
Madam Chair, may I make a suggestion? In the way that this document is set up and there's strikeovers in it, makes it easier to work with. And what I was doing with the other documents is that when I went through and I had a question, then I highlighted it, if it was only just to remind me that I've got a question about it.
Mm-hmm. So you'd like it to come out the same way?
Yeah, I think when we have a question, we highlight it, and then when we get to it, we discuss it, and
right.
Even if send them in earlier if we want, like you suggested.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Trustee Crawford. Robert.
Thanks, Chair Stone. I think you did cover it. Just wanted to confirm the approach. So I think what we're hearing is we'll bring this forward with some of the other edits to the next meeting, and then with likely the intention of then moving that forward to standing afterwards, pending other discussion of the committee itself. In terms of the date of the next meeting, we're in your hands on when you'd like to generally have that, and we can send out the poll for what would work.
That's great. Yeah, I think we need to definitely one or the other. The code, if it's done and we still need to work on the bylaws, then at least one or the other going out to standards, standing, or both. Trustee Edwards.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on Trustee Crawford's about, we do recognize the government has a survey out there on code of conduct, but that was just there. It would take, considering as again that the government is going to rise on December 9th and then they don't come back to Family Day, I don't think this is going to be on a high priority. So this should go ahead as suggested to proceed and get this done, going to another meeting and so forth. We shouldn't be waiting for the government to make any further changes, depending on what they say.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Council Cotter.
I think in terms of, thank you, Chair Stone, I think in terms of the government too, we saw the Ombudsman report, recommending, updates to codes of conduct and such. And, our existing and our draft that the committee has is sort of would meet and exceed all the recommendations coming from the ombudsman. So we're at the front of the pack on this, I think, anyway. So I think any recommendations were good. You know, it'd be surprising if there was any recommendations that came out that required us to go back.
Great, thank you. Any further comments? No. Seeing none, I'm adjourning this meeting. It's 8:21. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thanks.